Okay, I think we're live here after a little bit of a
Looks it.
challenge getting started. Um,
Mhm.
this is Dana Theus with Empower Coaching and Empower Women, and I've got Liz McGrory on the line. Say hi, Liz.
Hi, everyone.
And we had a little technical difficulty getting going. We're still having a little technical difficulty getting the Q&A going, but I'll keep trying to get that loaded. And I want to welcome everybody here live or viewing the recording for what I think is going to be a really interesting conversation about parenting and motherhood in particular, and work and leadership. We don't always put those things together, but they go together quite well, as Liz is going to tell us about. So first, I just want to say that Liz has just written a book called Igniting Your Mommy Energy. And the reason that I really wanted to have this interview and cover it on the site was because she really taps into something I believe is important, which is how well parenthood and leadership can go together when you're being intentional about it. So I want to interview her about that and how these things go together and how it's not always so easy, but that when you bring your intention to it, you can be much more successful at work and at home with your family as a result. So Liz, welcome, and I just want to really honor you for writing this book. I think it was much needed, and I really wanted to ask you about something you said in the opening to the book, which really captured my imagination. You said, igniting your mommy energy is about how to consistently and realistically be in a state of joy, so that you can use your mommy energy as you see fit instead of how others will dictate to you you should spend your energy. And I'm wondering, isn't this good advice for everybody? Is this really just for moms? Where did all this come from for you?
Sure. Great first question. First, thanks so much for inviting me on here and helping me in my virtual book tour. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So, yes, practicing energy management to get yourself consistently in a state of joy so you feel more in control of how you use your energy is wonderful advice or a great goal for anyone to try to achieve. My point in this sentence is that mummy energy is so precious and somewhat magical, like mother's intuition. And I don't feel that your mommy energy should be left out in the cold when you go into the workplace. I think that the mommy energy that starts to build once you become a mother, you learn empathy on a whole new level. You learn about love. I remember about having my second child, I thought, am I going to have enough love for this one? And then when my third came along, I thought, okay, really, like my capacity, could it get any bigger? And my point here is that that empathy and that love, which is the basis of mommy energy, is something that we should be bringing into the boardroom. I think that showing empathy when you are in the career place is such an important skill to have as a leader. And if you are to ignite that mommy energy, you're more in control. You're using all of your skills, your strength as a mother, as a leader, and you're bringing that in. And when you're in that state of joy, and it won't be all the time, life gets pretty bumpy. But when you're in that state of joy, you're able to be in more control. And as mothers and as working mothers, we tend to give control to others. Sometimes it's just, let's just do what everyone else is doing. But when you're in a state of joy, you think clearly. You are able to make judgments based on your priorities, so that at the end of that sentence is not letting other people take it from you. To firmly believe that this mommy energy that only we have, we can use it to the best of our abilities. So in my book, I talk about a range of emotions that I felt and how I was able to move back into joy so that I was able to be in control, because for a time I wasn't. And that's part of the story that I share in my book.
So let me ask you about those other emotions specifically, because you're talking, and so I should admit I have two children. They're both in college right now, although one of them was home last night. Actually, you see the one on the wall behind me when he was
Yeah.
like 8 months old. Well, now he's 21, going on 22, and he's smoking cigars with his dad. Um, but anyway, my point is that having been through that first 21 years of motherhood, part of the things when you're talking about joy, there's this little voice in the back of my head going, how can you be joyful when you're so exhausted? And it was really interesting to me that in your book, the all the emotions you just referenced that you discuss are anxiety, sadness, anger, fear, guilt, and then joy. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why these particular emotions were the ones that you chose to discuss.
Mm-hmm. So I started writing this book about 3 years ago, and I was documenting my story because I don't want other working moms to feel alone, because I did. And I documented as much as I could. I started writing in my journal. I started a blog over on LizzieMc.com. And as I was writing the book, I didn't think of organizing them into emotions. But then I learned about emotional intelligence, and I started thinking about placing things in a box so that I could handle something later. And I remember talking to my dad about, maybe I can just put something in a box, and he was like, Lizzie, why would you do that? Like, why wouldn't you just let it help you along the way? So I started doing that with my book. I started compartmentalizing all the emotions that I went through, and it's actually in the order that I felt them the most. So anxiety was when I first became a working mom, and daycare. That was not pleasant for me. I don't know if I think it's pleasant for people that find the right daycare or babysitter or nanny. I never really found that, unfortunately. So those emotions that I went through, I just thought, let's just do it chronologically. And I could talk about so many more emotions. So that's why within each chapter, I sort of chunked together similar emotions to this big one that I called the chapter.
So you focus a little bit, and I think this is related to some of those emotions. You call them NTGs, the Motherhood Transition Challenges. Mm-hmm. And you said you really felt alone when you were dealing with these MTCs, one of which was like, do I return to work or not, et cetera. And I was a little surprised at that, because many mothers find other mothers, to like hang out with during pregnancy and into early motherhood. And I'm wondering, does the feeling alone, is it going to happen anyway, even if you have friends going through it? Tell us more about the MTCs and what it means to transition into motherhood when you're a working professional. And you should probably preface this with, you were a working professional on a leadership track as you had these three children, right?
Yes, I was. Let's see where to start. I was alone, and it's unfortunate. And the reason why I was alone was, fortunately for us, it was new house, new baby. So I moved into a neighborhood where I didn't know any of my amazing neighbors. Talk about a great support system. One of my kids is over at my neighbor's right now having lunch. So I didn't know anyone in the neighborhood. The town, although I was familiar with it, I didn't know anyone that lived in town. In my career, I was in the male-dominant field. I was in a call center. My schedule was very, very strict. Although I am a people person, it was difficult for me to get away from my desk and reach out to the very few working moms that I worked with. And, it wasn't until I was really struggling that I did reach out to a few of them. But it felt a little personal to me, like in that moment that I wanted to reach out, I was already at a very low in my career, so I didn't feel confident where I stood in the company. So that you talked about the leadership track that I was on. So when I left for my second maternity leave, I had done everything in my power to show management that I was ready for management. I received the best performance review of my life, and I'm still very proud of it. And I was convinced that I was going to come back to a management position. I didn't. The other guy got it, and I'm very thankful that he got it because I wouldn't be talking to you right now if I had got it. And the lessons that I learned from it, it's just made my life so much richer. Although I definitely could not have said that while going through it in the moment because it was awful, resentful, very angry, and I am a very happy, optimistic, hopeful individual. So that's the face that everyone was expecting to see from Lizzie. And so at the point in time where I needed help, I had a complete different face on. It was hard to smile. I was now leaving a colicky baby. I was not getting any sleep. I was leaving two children instead of one. So my Jedi mind trick about leaving my children for a career that I loved, I didn't love it anymore. It felt like just a job. So I was alone. And it wasn't until I bumped into a leadership and executive coach. I word vomited everything that had happened. And he said, Lizzie, I think I can help you. I'm going to coach you. And I had no idea what coaching was. Nothing. But I figured something was better than nothing. And my company, which was a wonderful company to work for, the people were fantastic, and I did get support. They agreed to hiring him, and I got 8 months of hard but very beneficial coaching, and it resulted into Coach Lizzie Mick.
So basically, here's an opportunity for you to talk to the women out there who are right now in the motherhood, transition phase. What is the support you need? That your coach gave you, that you work with your clients on. When you're in that point where you just kind of can't see the way out, or I should say, what are the symptoms of needing that support through this phase, and then what is the kind of support that you need to achieve this place where you can be in joy even with this busy mom obligation and work obligation.
So the point where I knew that I needed something, my priorities had changed, and I was struggling with how to cope with that and how to make everything click. So when you feel like there's like this friction, and like when your gut is telling you something's just not right and you can't get out of your own way to discover what that is, that's when I would say you need to reach out. Coaching has become very popular, and as it should, because it works. It's not miracles, it's hard work, but it works wonders. Why else? When you're left with almost like nothing, when you just don't have any energy, that when you wake up in the morning, and not like, oh, I have to go to work. It's like when you wake up in the morning and you feel the pressure on your chest and on your shoulders, and you're getting snappy at maybe even your newborn. I know I was guilty of that. And you're just so frustrated, and you're like, hey, wait a second. This isn't me. Like, what's going on? And you don't know. You have no idea. At that point, the kind of support that you should be reaching out for is, I went to my parents first. Luckily, I have them, and my in-laws as well. And I'm a very talkative person, so it's easy for me to talk. But for people that find it a little bit more challenging to open up, I would try and start writing. For me, it was very beneficial to write. And I think taking what's going on in your mind and putting it down on paper, or typing away your woes, get on Facebook, start a private group, and start talking to people that are close to you, that know the real you, and just start talking. When you hear yourself, or when you see it down on paper, it makes it more real. And sometimes something will click. And just getting it out there when you're asking for help, knowing the why, And that means being vulnerable, which doesn't make anybody feel comfortable except for the wonderful Dr. Brene Brown, who's become an ace at it and a mentor of mine. I would highly recommend her book, Daring Greatly. This one. I got a plethora of books. This one, Daring Greatly. Um, what was I saying? Oh, so yes, figuring out the why and being vulnerable, although it may feel uncomfortable for you, it's setting the expectation to the people that you're asking for help that they now know what's expected of them. And it makes the relationship goes a little smoother, and it may help you open up a little bit more. The great thing about having a coach is that they're prepared for this. They know what's coming at them, and they have processes and things that they go through with their clients to be ready, to be sitting, to give you the space to not judge you about what's going on in your life, and to listen to you wholeheartedly and willing to put something in place to get you out of your stickiness. You
Well,
get it.
actually related to that, when I was reading your book, I was just really impressed of like how much of your own coaching genius you put into the book. You really give a lot of practical, I mean, really practical advice for how to step through those more difficult emotions to get towards joy and achieve joy. And I'm just wondering, what compelled you to put so much of that coaching genius into the book?
When I first needed help, and it happens at all different stages in my life, when I come up against something, the first thing I do is I look for a book on it. So I thought, I have this great story to tell. I'm pretty good at writing. I'm just going to start, and we'll see if I actually push it out there. And I'm so happy that I did. Writing this book gave me the opportunity to give everyone my story. Here I am. Talk about being vulnerable, right? Here I am. Here's my story. When I'm coaching clients, I can't really tell them about everything of who I am or what my experiences were. So it's a way for me to communicate. I've been there. I've been in the trenches. I know where you stand right now, or I have a pretty good idea. And I go back to it again. I don't want them to be alone. I don't want them to feel how I felt. So writing a book and putting it out there, I'm hoping that they don't feel alone anymore because it's relatable, and I'm giving them something right now for them to step out of it, to get out of it. So yeah, that was pretty much the reason why I had to put something out there, because I don't want anyone to have to go through what I did.
I love that. What a great reason. And so your oldest is in school now, right? How old is he?
Yeah, first grade. Oh,
Boy. So you've had several kids for a while now, while you've been working both in an office environment on a leadership track and at home. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how being a parent can help make you a better leader. I found this, I blogged on it before, that in retrospect, things I kind of wished I'd learned as a leader, I ended up learning as a parent and applying it in my my work environment. I think I learned some things at work that I applied with my kids too. But I'm wondering if you
yes.
can talk about that kind of back and forth, because eventually we get out of that new baby phase and now we're into parenting phase, and there's a lot of opportunities there too. What have you learned?
Yes. So my son, my 6-year-old son, he comes home and he talks about his day, and it's I get shunned sometimes, like, oh, Mom, I just don't want to talk about it. I'm like, what? You used to tell me like everything. So I think a parallel between the two for me has been evolving my emotional intelligence, which I blogged about on your website.
Yes, you
And
did.
I think it goes both ways. And it's things about EI that I learn by being a parent. Like empathy came naturally to me, and but when I went through my bout, when I went through like my real low, I was no longer empathetic. I almost lost it because I thought that someone was always out, not out to get me, but I didn't believe anybody. anymore. And the customers got ruder to me. And I lost it. And being a parent, your number one thing is empathy. Because when you're putting yourself in your child's position, like we don't all remember when we were 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds, but you can see it in their face, like, oh, they really want that toy. Like, so my children actually helped me bring my empathy back so that I could bring it back into my career. And it helped me in my career. Empathy really was huge for me to get back because I was able to get back into my career. I was able to be happy, waiting for that light at the end of the tunnel to gradually come for the day that I could move on to what I've always wanted, which was running my own business. I feel like I have one more thing to add to that. Gosh. Hmm. Nope, I guess not. I can't think of it in the moment. But what about you? What have you brought from parenting into your career?
Actually, I wrote a couple of posts, and I think it was like 10 things, but so I won't go over them all because I can't even remember them all. But the one that I kind of had the big aha about was actually mentorship because when my kids got old enough to be rational, and now you're not just saying yes and no and setting rules, but you're kind of negotiating with things, and trying to find motivation for them, well, if you want that, Xbox, you have to work a little harder and save some money, etc. And what I found with my children was that if I kind of mentored them and didn't tell them how to do it, but gave them the goals and played into their motivations and gave them support, they could accomplish much more than if I had kind of stepped in. And I began to realize, hey, wait a minute, I could do that with my staff too. Duh.
Yeah.
I had already done it. I'd already done it, but not quite as intentionally. Because with my kids, I was like trying to solve the problem without stepping on their little egos. And I began to realize employees are not children by any means, but many of the same philosophies about, give them the space to find their own way really work great. And so for me, both at home and at work, that kind of stepping into my potential as a mentor and leading through mentorship and coaching ultimately was really kind of huge and helped me in both places. And I consider it one of the biggest blessings of parenthood, to be honest.
Yes, I agree. I can add to that. At one point, I was tired of doing everything for my children, specifically plates, cups, utensils. So I took it all from the top shelf and I brought it down to their level. So now they have their own cabinet where all their stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
And if they want something, they can go and get it. And I don't tell them, like, oh, you're having cereal, you need to get a bowl. I just sort of like, okay, you want cereal? I brought that down to their level. And it relates to when I was training people. I would give them the tools that they needed to say this is what you use for that. And then during the training sessions, I would just sit back to say, and if they asked, I'd be like, what do you think? So it did go. It was in tandem. Yeah. What a great question.
I know. I talk to a lot of people about this, and everybody has different answers, but everybody pretty much sees a lot of parallels between their parenting and their leadership style, which I guess is appropriate. So just in closing, let me ask you to give some advice to the alone, tired, beat down, exhausted mother who's kind of stuck in all those first emotions, the anxiety and the stress and the fear and the anger. What's your best advice for her? What can she do right now? In addition to buy your book, by the way, which I think she should go do right now. Go buy your book. What can she do to start getting to that place of power and joy right now?
What I would recommend is for her to focus on the reality of the situation. I think that the first emotions that I cover in my book, a lot of them are just, they're up here. And you just get tied into it, and then you move on to something else because, I don't know, a child gets a boo-boo, or you forgot about a meeting that you have to run off to, and then you come back to it, and it's still scrunching in there, and we just let it go. We let it go by the wayside. If you focus on what the reality is, so if you're anxious about let's say you're returning from maternity leave, and you're anxious about leaving your child at a daycare, I'm worried that they're not going to be able to take care of my child. Well, is that true? I'm paraphrasing. I got a really good library. I'm paraphrasing a book by Byron Katie called Loving What Is.
Oh, what a
I
wonderful
told you, I go to books.
book.
Have you read this?
I have read parts of it and seen many of her videos. She's amazing.
Tabs. Yeah, yes. So she has 4 questions in here. In reading the book, you'll get more of the gist to it, so I'll paraphrase it. So the first question she says to ask yourself about the reality is it true? Well, yeah, I am really nervous about dropping my kids off at daycare. They're not going to be able to take care of my child. Then the second question is, can you absolutely know that it's true? Well, I guess there's 100 other people that do trust them with my child, so they will probably be able to take care of my child. And the third question she asks is, what would you be like if you didn't, how would you react when you think that thought? So when you think about that anxiety, how do you react? You feel icky, you get, it overwhelms you, and you freeze. Am I really going to be able to drop him or her off and get back in my car and go? Those are not happy memories. You get over it and you'll live, but it's not fun. And then the fourth question she asks is, who would you be without the thought? How would you feel if you didn't feel anxious about dropping your child off? You'd be able to go back to work, get started kicking tuchus in your career, and you'd be on it. You'd be able to focus on your before. You're trying to figure out what your new normal is when you come back from maternity leave. And if you didn't think that thought, you'd be able to get back on the horse and keep going down that path that you have worked so hard on. Motherhood does not need to derail you from what you've been working toward. Yes, your priorities may change, but there's ways for you to make them click. And the last part of her thing is to turn it around on yourself, which means I'm anxious about dropping my child off at daycare. When you turn it around, you could say, oh gosh, I don't even know what you can say. I practice this often, so I guess you could turn around and say, I'm anxious about going back to work. Maybe that's actually the reality of it. So it's not daycare that you're anxious about. You're anxious just about going back to work and all the challenges that you'll face. Your body's changed. Maybe you're breastfeeding. How are you going to act? Like, you want to talk about your baby 24/7, and although some people may want to hear about it, they're there to work. So I would highly recommend her book and just focusing on what the reality is, because you can't fight it. It is what it is, and once you learn to love that, you feel like you can breathe for a moment, and you get that little blip of joy.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the in-power principles that I work with clients is that there's power in accepting what is for what it is, for the exact same reason. Because the minute you accept it, you stop fighting it, and you gain back all that energy you were using to fight. It just becomes yours and available to you right away. And then you change it, because acceptance doesn't mean approval. Acceptance means you stop fighting it, and you get that energy back, and now you have something to work with when it comes to changing your situation. So I think we're speaking the same language there with Byron Katie, which is cool. And I would suggest also to that woman who might be kind of sitting there really struggling with what to do, go ahead and contact Lizzie, because in addition to your book, you have so much wisdom to offer, and I just really appreciate you being here in this conversation today. I appreciate the blog posts that you wrote on our site, and I hope we see a lot more of you.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate talking to you and talking to everyone over at empowerwomen.com.
Yep, and I apologize that the question and answers didn't work, but on this post down below, if you want to ask questions, we'll make sure that Lizzie can see them, and you'll get your questions answered. Thanks so much. See you all later.
Bye.